Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
And I was, again, had gone out on radio, thankfully had gotten out. My dispatcher was an absolute lifesaver. She had, upon hearing my very first transmission that I made in the car when I came out on air, when I thought I said I shots fired 29th and Yesler, again, which was our location, I had actually just come on air and said shots fired north of Yesler. Again, for those of you not familiar with Seattle, Yesler is a very long road. It's a very main road. It bisects kind of the southern part of the city, long enough that it goes from Yesler to East Yesler. So there's even different parts of the road. We technically were at East Yesler. So my dispatcher actually looked at our GPS to see where we were and put out a help the officer on my location even before I was able to get back on air and give our exact location. So I was eternally grateful for that. Once I heard the blue wave coming, which is of course what we refer to the help the officer, I just could hear the sirens. I at that point knew it was just kind of me in the fight, and was ready to actually go. There was an apartment, that same apartment building had an exterior door to the one of their lower level apartments, and it again, time when you're under this type of trauma and stress, can either go super fast or super slow. And this is the point where it went really slow and was feeling like forever. And so I was preparing to go and kick in this apartment door to be able to narrow down my threats and just have one threat to cover on, and just, was playing through in my head like, okay, I'll explain to the people if there's people in there what I'm doing, they'll understand type of thing. And just as I was about to go running over to go try to kick in this door, right then the sirens were getting louder and closer. And thankfully, I saw the first patrol cars pull in. I Once I saw them pull in, again, I saw them. They did not see me. I was taking cover. I was um, down kind of on a knee between two cars, and I saw the officers, many of whom I had just met an hour and a half earlier at coffee, jump out of the patrol car and, of course, run right up to the patrol car where Tim and I were. And, of course, they saw that Tim had, um, suffered horrible injuries and was not alive. And then were looking for me. And I watched them actually look for me. And I still didn't feel safe giving up my location to even my brethren that were there to help me. I finally said something. I don't recall what I said, but I said something that led them to finding me. And at that point, one of the officers ran. I heard him yell to another officer, "I found her! I found her! She's up here!" And again, I was down on a knee, and so when he came and stood over me, I heard the other officer say, "Is she okay?" And the officer next to me said, "She's been shot in the back." I knew my head hurt, and that's when the officer asked me if I was okay. I kept telling him that my head hurt. I did not feel any pain in my back. My thought was, oh crap, I just don't feel that one yet. And so they had me stand up. The officer asked me to stand up. He asked me to holster my weapon. I put my Glock into my holster. I heard the first retention click. I did the second retention, and as soon as that retention clicked, something in me just knew I was no longer, like, this wasn't my job anymore. Like, this wasn't my job to protect the scene or find this person. Like, everybody else was now piling in there, and I knew that there was no longer work for me to do. I guess, like, I just remember mentally just knowing that the battle for me was done as far as that moment. And so when that second click of my retention went, I just the waterworks went on. I threw my hands up in the air, and you'll have to edit me, Jared, but I walked off, and my exact words were, "Fuck this, I quit." And they literally had to chase me down, um, grab me, do the buddy check, strip me of my uniform to make sure I didn't have any um, other unknown wounds on me, and they got me into the back of a medic unit. And uh, it turns out that um, I assume, um, well, the first round that came into the vehicle grazed the top of my head, and that was the wound that I felt. And that's my head that hurt. I can only assume it was had to have been the second round. Actually went up the uh, middle of my back and caught my shirt and vest right dead center spine. Um, and went through all but the very last layer of my Kevlar. And just um, lucky for me, it when it hit the Kevlar, instead of rifling and digging in, it rifled and deflected, and obviously went out. How it didn't hit me in the back of the head um, is just, nobody really knows. It's all kind of um, I guess you can say, a miracle. I obviously just believe in a greater being. Obviously, had their eye on me that night, so um, I was able to essentially walk away from this with just a mild wound to the top of my head. But Tim obviously did not survive. It Over the course of the investigation, it was found out that it was actually 223 rounds that we had taken. So realistically, had the vest obviously wouldn't have stopped those rounds if I had been hit straight on. But it still was able to deflect and, like I said, rifle um, spin those off rather than dig them in. So um, I was able to, I survived. I walked away from that night, and um, Tim died instantly at the scene, and then the intensive manhunt, which is what you got to hear in DC, ensued from that night forward. So I don't know if there's more.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, I appreciate you sharing that because, um, first of all, of all initial blessings, and I don't want to make light of it, but thank God you were as vertically challenged as you are, because if you'd been an inch taller, that round that grazed the top of your head uh, would have been a bad one. So
Yes.
just to kind of set the scene here, this car basically pulls up right next to you guys, and like you said, it was so close you couldn't have opened your door. So that means the hood of his car was probably you probably could have reached out the window and touched it, right?
So it was such that I could have reached out and like touched probably like by the window because he was even with our car. So his A pillar
Oh,
was
okay.
was equal to our A pillar. If you
So
know,
he was right next to you as opposed to a little bit behind you.
right next to us. And it
Wow.
was, I do recall that the car was smaller. Like, a Crown Vic is, kind of a chunky car, if you will, for being, essentially a sedan. I remember this being like lower and smaller, and it, did turn out, through the investigation, it was a Datsun, some old Datsun. I don't remember the exact model, but it was a smaller
Hmm.
car, and so height wise, the Crown Vic just sat higher, which I believe absolutely plays into, yes, me thankfully being short, but also the angle, with him shooting the rifle, one handed, of course. Um, and I just think the angle of him having to shoot up into the window,
Hmm.
was also what, caused him to have, thankfully, bad aim.
So the theory, and I'm sure the ballistics showed this, but he essentially had a long gun and he laid it on his windowsill, and that's how he was firing it, or was he actually trying to brace it with just one hand?
So they found, when they did end up, finding him and doing the warrant on his apartment, they found the rifle. It was a kind of crappy Kel-Tec, AR, and it had, um, and this goes to the 15 years ago time frame, telephone cord. Like, if you remember, like, telephone cord for landlines, like the actual, not the kind of coily one, but just kind of that clear telephone cord. That's what he had, kind of as like a sling, like a modified sling on the rifle. And what they deducted is that he used that, to kind of, brace it around his forearm so that he was able to extend his arm, but yet, be able to single handedly kind of shoot this rifle. Um,
Hmm.
because I do not believe it was resting on his vehicle. Because again, his vehicle was lower than ours, and
Yeah.
so
Okay.
his angle, because one of the rounds did go through, um, like the um, the very top of the door. I think it actually just went through the weather stripping, like the little rubber piece. I think it went through that. So that's kind of how low he was even shooting at us. I'm gonna guess that was one of his final rounds that went through
Wow.
there, but he did shoot it
So
single handed.
how many rounds did he get off?
I believe he shot 7 or 8 rounds. I'm not,
Hmm.
I forget off the top of my head. But yeah, he got about 7 or 8. And honestly, I was shocked to hear that it was only 7 or 8, because it felt like it was at least 30 when, going through this. So,
I mean, at literally point blank range. That's,
yes.
yeah, it's incredible. So as you were telling your story, especially when you were describing what it was like as he was, the rounds were actually going off. Um, I've had friends, I don't have a police background. I've been in the military for, I was in the military for a long time, and fortunately I never had to go to war, so I've never had anybody actually shooting at me, at least not with live rounds. But of all the people that I've talked to, all the friends that have gone to war, um, they said you really don't realize how, like you said, time stands still, and but really how terrifying it can be until rounds are actually coming that close to you. And I had one friend in particular that said he was on a mission with the special forces over in the Philippines, and they started taking rounds. And he said literally he had like a little, like a tree branch in front of him, and he was so scared. He was trying to dig a foxhole with his fingers to get as low as he possibly could. And everybody talks big until the rounds start flying, and then they but and until that, you really don't know how you're going to respond. So the fact that you had the wherewithal as a rookie with only a few weeks on the job to recognize what was going on and then get, crouch, find some space to literally hide in, um, and get as low as you possibly could. You know, I don't think much more than 0.001% of the population can even really understand what you went through. And I know you were kind of breezing through it, but I don't think there's many things that would be more terrifying. And the fact that you're able to sit here with us and tell this story to me is just incredible, because again, it's just one of those things that hardly anybody in our entire society goes through this. So it's again,
Well,
it's hard for me to comprehend, but try to can you remember? I mean, I know you were saying, you were trying to get as low as you could, and you shoved your butt against the door and crouched down even lower. But what was going through your mind there? You said time was going slow.
I actually, I'm glad that you asked about this because, again, I speak about this openly, and I like to share my story for a multitude of reasons, and more so as the years go on because a lot. I don't know. There's a lot of things that kind of come to light that I feel are important. And one of them, and I mentioned this a little bit when I said, I applied to, be an officer and such, and I don't have any background to include, no family in military or first responders. And, I think when I was in academy, while I, was physically strong and able to do everything, I think there was part of maybe even the training staff that kind of wondered if I had it in me. We, um, looked at me as a recruit, and I'm just a big proponent on, your training is kind of everything that you have. Um, Now, fast forward to that moment when all of a sudden we were taking gunfire. And as I said, every round that went off, I remember feeling myself just trying to like bury myself deeper and deeper into the car. Um, it the only thing I had experienced up to that point was essentially scenarios from academy, right? That was the only comparison I had of any sort of maybe adrenaline, you know, rush, if you will. And so at one point I thought to myself, uh, do I have rights to fire back at this guy? Like it was still kind of like I was in an academy setting of like, okay, what do I have here? What's my legal authority? What's my lawful purpose? Like what am I like? What level of force am I allowed to? Like my brain was kind of like going through the academy, checklist stuff, and ironically, I went from that thought to the next thing I knew, like I said, I was about three trigger pulls in. I don't remember drawing my gun. I don't remember, like, I remember seeing the vehicle backing up, but like, um, everybody hears about, and of course, a lot of people, especially in law enforcement, know about all the studies that Force Science does, and how there's the audio exclusion, the visual acuity, and all the things that your body goes through under stress, right? Um, and it's interesting because if I were to take everything that happened, it's not like this free flowing movie that I can just watch in my head. It's literally more like a slideshow. um,
Hmm.
is like all of a sudden I have like an image in my head of this, and it doesn't even really flow or move. It's not even animated. It's literally just like a snapshot, and then it's almost like click, boom, there's the next slide type of thing. And that's how my brain is with this, which is, again, if you do any studies with force science and the body under stress, that's normal. But it's interesting because your body and mind fills in the blanks, because that's especially when you're involved, you want like answers, you want to know. And it's, that causes its own anxiety. But I absolutely remember sitting there and thinking, oh gosh, do I have rights to do this? And again, before I even had a chance to answer it, I was already acting, or reacting, I guess I should say. But it's a big piece of why I speak to this, because I always want to encourage people to know that if you follow your training and if you're open to your training, like, you don't need to have the background. I think grit, determination, and a will to survive and live, um, can be better than 20 years of tactical training. Because like you said, I think until you're on the other end of that, lead being shot at you, you have no idea how you're going to act. And I obviously am wholly grateful to know that I didn't give up in the fight by any stretch.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of things that people say about cops that are so far from being the truth that it's just ridiculous. Such as one of the things, especially once I started this podcast, some of the comments that I get are really, really interesting. So, but one of the things that I think is kind of a general feeling out there with a lot of people that never really take the time to investigate it themselves is a lot of comments is, people become cops because they want to carry a badge and be able to bully people and be able to make up for you know little man syndrome or whatever, just ridiculous things like that. But in reality, in my mind, and I want you to comment on this, is I think of when people are, especially once they're actually in it and they're committed to it and they're in the academy and they're learning from people like you, in order to put that badge on, just because you carry a sidearm doesn't mean anything. You could have died just as easily right there next to Tim in that patrol car that night. And, thank God you didn't. But the experience that you have of going through that, every single officer, I'm positive, thinks about going through something like that every time they put the uniform on. And it's not so that they can go out and bully people. A lot of it is they want to serve, but at the same time, the realization that night or that shift, they could end up in a scenario like what you went through. So tell me if I'm off base, or based on your experience, what do you think about those kind of comments?
No, absolutely. It's funny because you always have those, little keyboard trolls that love to make the comments about the cops. And, oh yeah, they're just getting back at everybody who teased them in high school or whatever the comments are, right? Um, I can assure you that there's way too many hoops to jump through and too much that you have to do. And you know, I don't know anybody that tries to, like, thinks that by being a cop, like it's, I'll show you, like, you bullied me in high school, but I'm going to be the ultimate bully. Like, I think it's giving a little too much credit and forethought to that. No, like, I think people do this job. It literally is a calling. I mean, uh, I fell into it in some ways, but I was just drawn. I don't know what it was. Something like essentially told me, like, you know what, like, that's what you need to go and do. And I think that's how it is for a lot of people. And of course, a lot have the family background and such, and they grow up in it and they see it. I think there's there's all types of people in this world, but the people who choose to be officers are people who feel the need to live with purpose. And I'm not taking anything away from people who, in the civilian world, who have whatever job it is. Like, I'm not saying that you don't have purpose, but it's just a different purpose. This is a purpose to kind of do outside of yourself and to be that protector. And I honestly think it's actually the opposite. I mean, growing up, I was actually always a protector of my friends, even at a young age. I never liked seeing people get bullied. I was always the person that was trying to separate and make nice. So I think they actually are the opposite, because you wouldn't go out and put your life on the line for people you've never met and you don't know. Uh, if you were just looking to overcompensate for being the bully or trying to be a bully.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.